The basement was darker than I remembered. It always smelled damp, like old wood and mold. But that night there was something else in the air. Something sharp, metallic. My daddy led the way, his footsteps slow and deliberate on the creaking stairs. The light from the bare bulb overhead flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. "Tonight's special," he said without turning around. His voice echoed off the walls, but there was no warmth in it, no hint of the daddy I knew from before. "You're ready now." Ready for what? I wanted to ask, but my throat had closed up, my words stuck somewhere deep inside me. Instead, I followed him, my bare feet cold against the concrete floor, feeling the dread rising in my chest. He stopped in front of a large wooden box that I'd never seen before. It looked ancient, the wood dark and splintering in places, with strange symbols carved into the lid. "Come closer," he beckoned, his voice almost a growl now. I hesitated, but the look he gave me, those cold, expectant eyes, left me no choice. I stepped forward, my heart hammering, and he knelt beside the box. With a low grunt, he pried the lid open, revealing something I couldn't understand at first. It looked like bones. Small, brittle bones, neatly arranged inside like some kind of sick puzzle. "Touch them," he ordered, grabbing my wrist and pulling my hand toward the box. "No," I whispered, instinctively trying to pull back, but his grip tightened like a vice. "Do it." I didn't know what those bones were. Part of me didn't want to know. But as my fingers grazed the cold, fragile remains, something passed through me. A shiver that wasn't just from the cold. It was like a presence, something watching from the shadows, unseen but deeply felt. I gasped, snatching my hand back, but the sensation lingered, crawling under my skin. Daddy stood, a satisfied smirk on his face. "You feel it now, don't you?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. "That's them. They've been waiting for you." He leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear. "And now, you belong to them too." The days after that night blurred together. I tried to forget what I had seen, tried to pretend everything was normal, but Daddy wouldn't let me. Every time we were alone, he'd make me go back down to the basement, to the box. The more I touched the bones, the more I felt them, voices in the dark, whispers that followed me even when I wasn't in the basement. At school, I stopped talking to anyone. The other kids noticed, of course, but they didn't care. They already thought I was weird, the quiet girl with the distant father who never came to school events. I wished I could tell someone, wished I could explain what was happening, but I knew Daddy would find out. He always knew when I was thinking about telling. Then one day he brought me something new. Another box, smaller this time, with a lock on it. He handed me a tiny key, cold and heavy in my hand. "Keep this safe, he said. "You'll need it soon." Weeks passed, and the whispers grew louder. Sometimes I could hear them even when Daddy wasn't around. In the middle of the night, they'd call my name, soft at first, then louder, more insistent. I'd lie in bed, frozen, afraid to move, knowing that if I answered, something terrible would happen. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. The whispers were deafening, filling my head with their demands, their promises. I grabbed the key from under my pillow, the one Daddy had given me, and crept downstairs to the basement. My hand shook as I unlocked the small box he'd given me weeks before. Inside was a small, old-fashioned mirror. Its surface was smudged and cloudy, but I could still see my reflection, distorted and pale. And then, I saw something else. Behind me, just over my shoulder, a shadow moved. It wasn't Daddy. It wasn't anyone I knew. I spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing there. Only the flickering light, the damp walls, and the empty space where the shadows twisted in the corner. I looked back at the mirror, and the shadow was still there, closer this time. Too close. The whisper swarmed my thoughts louder than ever. I dropped the mirror, but the sound of it shattering wasn't enough to drown them out. My ears rang with the high-pitched wail of something hungry. That night I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The shadows had taken on a life of their own, creeping through every corner of the house. Daddy didn't seem to notice them, or maybe he just didn't care. He only watched me with that strange smile, like he was waiting for something to happen. And then it did. It started with the phone call. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the walls, when the phone rang. Daddy answered, his face going pale as he listened to whoever was on the other end. He didn't say anything, just hung up slowly, deliberately, and then turned to me. "We have to go," he said, his voice cold, flat. "Why? What happened?" But he didn't answer. He just grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the door, dragging me outside into the cold night air. The shadows followed us. I could feel them, swirling at the edges of my vision. I tried to pull away, but Daddy's grip was iron. "We don't have time," he hissed. "They're coming." We drove through the night, the silence between us suffocating. Daddy's hands gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles white under the dim glow of the dashboard. I glanced at him, searching his face for answers, but his expression was locked in that same distant, unreadable stare. The further we got from home, the louder the whispers became in my head, now taking on a frantic edge, like they knew something was coming. Something worse. It was hours before we stopped, pulling up to a rundown motel on the outskirts of nowhere. The neon sign buzzed faintly, casting eerie red light over the parking lot. Daddy didn't look at me as he got out, grabbed a duffel bag from the trunk, and motioned for me to follow. I hesitated for a moment, but the air felt thick with tension, like we were being watched, something just out of sight. I hurried after him. The room smelled like mildew and stale cigarettes. He dropped the duffel bag on the bed, unzipping it with a quick, practiced motion. Inside were things I didn't recognize: old books, strange trinkets, and a long curved knife. He turned to me, his eyes darker than I'd ever seen them. "Tonight, they'll come for you," he said, voice low. "And you need to be ready." "What are you talking about?" My voice trembled as I backed away, the cold tile floor icy beneath my feet. "They've been waiting," he continued, ignoring my question. "All those years, they've been watching you, waiting for you to be ready." "Who?" I demanded, panic rising in my chest. "Who's coming?" But before he could answer, the lights flickered. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and that familiar metallic smell, the one from the basement, filled the air. My breath caught in my throat as the shadows on the walls began to shift, growing darker, deeper, until they no longer seemed like shadows at all, but figures that moved. I stumbled backward, my heart slamming against my ribs. "Daddy, what is this?" "They're here," he whispered, eyes wide as he stared past me at the creeping darkness that filled the corners of the room. "It's time." Suddenly the whispers surged, louder than they'd ever been before, overlapping voices in my head, their words impossible to decipher. I clamped my hands over my ears, trying to block them out, but it didn't work. The air crackled with energy, the shadows closing in. And then, I felt it. Something cold touched my shoulder, soft at first, then stronger, pulling me toward the darkness. I screamed, trying to wrench myself free, but the grip was relentless. My legs buckled as I fell to the floor, dragged by an unseen force. The room twisted around me, the lights dimming until all I could see was the thick, suffocating blackness. "Help me," I cried, reaching out for Daddy, but he just stood there watching. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice distant. "I had to. It's the only way." His words cut through me like a blade. He wasn't going to stop it. He wasn't going to help. And that's when I knew. He had planned this. He had brought me here, knowing they would come for me. The shadows swirled around me, their whispers turning into low, guttural growls. Cold fingers crawled up my spine, and I felt something press against my neck. Something sharp, something final. The breath left my lungs as I was pulled deeper, deeper into the void, the room fading, my consciousness slipping away. When I woke up, the room was gone. I was somewhere else. The ground beneath me was soft, like damp earth, and the air smelled of rot and decay. There was no light, only a thick fog that swirled around me, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. I struggled to my feet, every muscle aching, my head pounding from the lingering voices that still echoed in my mind. "Hello?" I called, my voice barely a whisper in the oppressive darkness. Nothing. I took a step forward, the ground squelching underfoot, and then another. I had no idea where I was or how I had gotten here. The last thing I remembered was the motel, the shadows, and Daddy's face. His eyes, empty and cold. Something moved in the fog. A shape, just ahead, shifting slowly. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to make out what it was. It didn't look human. It didn't look like anything I could recognize, really. Just a dark, twisted mass of limbs and unnatural angles. And then it turned toward me. Its face, or what I thought was a face, was featureless, smooth and pale, like a blank canvas stretched too tight over bone. But I could feel its gaze, piercing through me, colder than anything I'd ever felt before. It was watching me, waiting. I turned and ran. The ground slipped under my feet as I sprinted through the fog, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away from whatever that thing was. But no matter how fast I ran, the whispers followed me, growing louder with each step, telling me things I didn't want to hear. Things about Daddy, things about myself. I stumbled, falling to my knees, hands sinking into the wet earth. The whispers were deafening now, drowning out everything else, and I could feel the presence closing in behind me. I turned, slowly, dread crawling up my spine. The figure was standing over me, close enough to touch. Its face still smooth, still blank. But now, it was smiling. And that's when I heard it, clear and unmistakable in my mind. Daddy's voice. "Finish it." The voice, Daddy's voice, echoed through my skull, louder than any whisper I had ever heard. It rattled my bones, filled my lungs with icy air, and froze me in place. I stared up at the figure towering over me, that grotesque, featureless face still smiling, as if it knew something I didn't. "Finish it," the voice said again, softer now, more insistent. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't move, pinned by the weight of the shadows creeping ever closer. The figure reached out, its long, twisted fingers stretching toward me, and I felt a pull deep in my chest, something inside me being yanked toward it. My vision blurred as the world around me began to fade, the fog closing in like a thick shroud. And then, just as the figure's hand was about to touch me, the ground beneath me gave way. I fell, plunging into an endless void, the darkness swallowing me whole. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, just falling, deeper and deeper, until there was nothing left but the sound of my own heartbeat, slow and steady in the silence. I woke up in my bed. For a moment I thought it had all been a dream. The basement, the shadows, the motel. But when I looked down at my hands, I saw the dirt under my fingernails, the mud caked to my skin. My heart skipped a beat and I scrambled out of bed, my head spinning as I tried to make sense of it. I was home. The house was quiet, just as it always was. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows on the walls. Everything looked normal, but it wasn't. I could feel it, the heaviness in the air, the quiet hum just beneath the surface, like the world was holding its breath. I called out for Daddy, but there was no answer. I wandered through the house, every room empty, every corner too still. Something wasn't right. The whispers, the shadows. They were gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still watching, still waiting. And then I found the door. It was in the hallway, near the back of the house, a door I had never noticed before. It was small, tucked into the corner, almost hidden behind an old coat rack. My hand hovered over the doorknob, my pulse quickening. I knew I shouldn't open it. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, to pretend I hadn't seen it. But I couldn't. Something pulled me toward it. Something stronger than fear. Stronger than reason. I turned the knob. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the dark. The smell hit me first. Damp, musty, like old wood and something rotten. My stomach twisted as I stepped inside, the air growing colder with each step. The basement. It had to be the basement, but it didn't look like the one I remembered. The walls were rough stone, covered in moss and mold, and the floor was uneven, wet in places where water had pooled. There was no light, except for a dim glow at the far end of the room, flickering like a candle in the distance. I moved toward the light, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The closer I got, the more I could make out. The outline of a figure, hunched over something on the floor, their back to me. "Daddy?" The figure didn't move. I stepped closer, my breath shallow, my heart racing. "Daddy?" This time the figure stirred, slowly turning to face me. My stomach dropped. It wasn't Daddy. It was me. I stared at the thing crouched in the corner, its face a perfect reflection of mine. Pale, gaunt, eyes wide with fear. It grinned, a slow, grotesque stretch of its lips, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too long. My own voice echoed back at me, distorted. Wrong. "Finish it." I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. But the figure didn't move. It just watched me, that twisted smile growing wider, its eyes gleaming in the dim light. I turned and ran, my footsteps pounding against the stone floor, the walls seeming to close in around me. The door at the top of the stairs was still open, but the closer I got, the further away it seemed, like the hallway was stretching, elongating, pulling me deeper into the darkness. "Finish it." The voice was everywhere now, surrounding me, filling my head with its command. I didn't know what it wanted. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. All I knew was that if I didn't get out, I would never see the light again. With one last desperate burst of speed, I threw myself at the door, slamming it shut behind me. The house was silent once more, the basement door disappearing as if it had never been there. But I knew better. Days passed. I didn't go back to the basement. I didn't call out for Daddy anymore. The house felt empty, abandoned, even though I knew I wasn't alone. I could still feel them, watching, waiting. The shadows never fully went away. I'd see them in the corners of my vision, flickering just out of sight, never staying long enough for me to catch them. And the whispers. The whispers were always there, just under the surface, reminding me of what I hadn't done, what I had to finish. I tried to fight it. I tried to ignore the pull, but every night it got stronger, gnawing at me, invading my thoughts until I couldn't think of anything else. And then one night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I heard it again. "Finish it." This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was Daddy's voice, clear and loud, right beside me. I bolted upright, my heart pounding, my skin clammy with sweat. The room was dark, but I could see the outline of something at the foot of my bed. A shape, familiar, but wrong. "Daddy?" My voice trembled, barely a whisper. The shape moved, slowly stepping into the light, and I saw his face. But it wasn't Daddy. It was the thing from the basement, the thing with my face, grinning at me with those two sharp teeth, its eyes gleaming with hunger. "Finish it," it said, its voice an exact echo of mine. And in its hand, I saw the mirror. The mirror gleamed in the darkness, its surface smooth and cold, reflecting nothing but my own pale face staring back at me. The thing holding it, the thing that looked like me, tilted its head, the grin on its face stretching impossibly wide. "Finish it," it repeated, voice eerily calm, as though it were asking something simple, something normal. I recoiled, pressing myself against the headboard, my heart racing. "No, I don't understand. What do you want from me?" The thing took a step closer, holding the mirror out toward me. Its reflection, my reflection, was distorted, twisted, like a funhouse mirror bending reality into something monstrous. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Something in the mirror held me, like invisible hands gripping my mind and forcing me to stare deeper, deeper into its glassy surface. And then, I saw something in the reflection that made my blood turn to ice. Behind me, standing in the shadows of the room, was Daddy. I turned sharply, but there was nothing there. Only the empty space where the shadows seemed to pulse, waiting, watching. When I looked back at the mirror, Daddy was closer, his face hidden in darkness, only the outline of his body visible, shifting unnaturally, like something was inside him, moving under his skin. The figure, my double, still grinned at me, but now its face was stretched too tight, the skin pale and translucent, the bones underneath sharp and jagged. "Finish it," it whispered again, the sound coming not from its mouth, but from the mirror itself. I wanted to scream, wanted to throw the mirror away, but my hands wouldn't obey me. They trembled as I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cool surface of the glass. The moment I touched it, a shock ran through me, and suddenly, I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. I was back in the basement. The walls were the same rough stone, slick with moisture, and the smell of decay hung heavy in the air. But this time, there was no dim light, no flickering candle to guide me. Only darkness, thick and impenetrable, stretching out in every direction. I could feel the ground beneath my feet, wet and cold, as if I were standing in shallow water, though I couldn't see it. And then, from the depths of the darkness, came the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I spun around, heart racing, my breath shallow and ragged, trying to find the source. But the sound was everywhere, echoing off the walls, growing closer with each step. My pulse quickened as a shape emerged from the darkness, a figure, tall and thin, moving with an unnatural grace. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel its gaze on me, cold and piercing. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible in the thick silence. The figure didn't respond. It just moved closer, one slow step at a time, until it was standing only a few feet away. I couldn't see its face, couldn't make out any details, but there was something familiar about it, something that made my stomach twist with dread. And then, it spoke. "Finish it." This time, the voice wasn't a whisper. It was a command, clear and sharp, echoing through the darkness. I stumbled back, my breath coming in shallow gasps as the figure raised its hand. In it was the mirror, gleaming faintly in the blackness. But this time, the reflection was different. It wasn't me. It wasn't Daddy. It was something else. Something wrong. The reflection twisted and writhed, the image shifting in and out of focus like something was trapped inside the glass, trying to break free. I could see its eyes, burning, hollow, filled with an endless hunger, and its mouth, twisted into a snarl, teeth bared. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "I don't know what you want. Please, just stop." The figure tilted its head, the shadow of its face moving unnaturally. "You know what you have to do." "I don't." I stopped, my voice catching in my throat. Because I did know. Somewhere deep inside, I had known all along. The bones in the box, the whispers, the shadows that had followed me for so long. They weren't just waiting for me. They were waiting for him. I remembered the night Daddy first took me down to the basement, the way he had watched me so closely, the way he had whispered that I was ready. I remembered the feel of the bones in my hands, the cold, brittle remains of something that had once been alive. And I remembered the look in his eyes, the fear, the regret, the desperation. He hadn't brought me to the basement to protect me. He had brought me to the basement to save himself. And now, the truth was staring me in the face, reflected in the twisted, snarling image in the mirror. Daddy wasn't coming back. I had to finish it. I don't know how long I stood there, staring into the mirror, feeling the weight of the truth settle over me like a suffocating blanket. Time didn't seem to exist in the basement, in the dark. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. But eventually, I knew what I had to do. The mirror was heavy in my hands as I lifted it, the cold glass sending a shiver down my spine. The figure in the darkness watched me, its face still hidden, but I could feel its approval, its silent encouragement. I turned the mirror over, the sharp edge of the broken glass catching the faint light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Finish it," the voice said again. But this time, it wasn't a command. It was an invitation. My hands trembled as I gripped the mirror, the jagged edge cutting into my palm. Blood dripped onto the floor, the sound sharp and clear in the stillness. I took a deep breath, closing my eyes, and lifted the mirror higher. And then, with one swift motion, I brought it down. The mirror shattered, the sound deafening, like a scream that pierced through the very fabric of reality. The glass splintered, the reflections scattering across the floor like shards of a broken dream. And as the mirror broke, so did the darkness. The figure in the shadows let out a low, guttural growl, the air around me vibrating with its anger, its frustration. The ground beneath my feet began to tremble, and the walls of the basement seemed to close in, the stone cracking and crumbling as the world around me collapsed. But I didn't stop. I kept smashing the mirror, again and again, until there was nothing left but dust and shattered glass, until the thing in the shadows was gone, its presence erased, its whispers silenced. And then, there was nothing. Just me, standing alone in the basement, the broken pieces of the mirror scattered around me, the air still and quiet. It was over, or so I thought. For a long time, I didn't move. The stillness of the basement wrapped around me like a thick fog, the shattered pieces of the mirror glinting faintly in the dim light. My breath came in shallow gasps, my heart pounding in my chest. I expected something to happen. Another voice, another whisper, something to confirm that I had done it, that I had finished whatever this was. But there was nothing, only silence. Slowly, I knelt down, staring at the broken glass scattered across the floor. My reflection no longer stared back at me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't hear the whispers. The air was thick with the smell of damp stone and mold, but it was calm now, still. It was as though the basement itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. I didn't know what to feel. Relief? Fear? Guilt? It was all too much, too overwhelming, and I felt my body trembling, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away, leaving behind a dull ache in my muscles. I had finished it. I had broken the mirror. The thing in the shadows was gone, but Daddy was still missing. I rose to my feet, my legs shaky, and made my way back toward the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if something was trying to pull me back, to keep me in the basement. But I forced myself forward, one foot in front of the other, refusing to look back. When I reached the top of the stairs, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door handle. I wasn't sure what I would find on the other side. Would the house be the same? Would it be empty, just like it had been before? Or would the shadows still be waiting for me, lurking in the corners, watching, waiting for another chance? I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The house was quiet, still. I stepped into the hallway, the air feeling lighter, less oppressive. The light filtering in through the windows was soft and warm, casting long shadows across the floor. For the first time in what felt like years, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt empty. But something wasn't right. I could feel it. A lingering presence, faint but undeniable. It wasn't like the shadows or the whispers from before. This was something different, something subtler. It clung to the edges of my awareness, just out of reach. But I knew it was there. I could feel it in my bones. I moved through the house, my footsteps slow and cautious, checking each room as I passed. The kitchen was empty. The living room, too. No sign of Daddy, no sign of the shadows that had plagued me for so long. Everything was as it should be. But when I reached the bedroom, I stopped cold. There, on the bed, was the duffel bag. The same one Daddy had brought to the motel, filled with strange objects, with things I hadn't understood at the time. My breath caught in my throat as I approached it, my heart pounding once again. I hadn't brought it back. It shouldn't be here. I knelt down beside the bed and unzipped the bag. Inside were the same old books, the same trinkets, the same long, curved knife. But there was something else, something new. A letter. It was folded neatly on top of the pile, the paper old and yellowed, the edges frayed. My hands shook as I picked it up, the familiar handwriting sending a chill down my spine. It was from Daddy. The letter was short, written in a shaky hand, the ink smudged in places, as though it had been written in a hurry. I'm sorry. I thought I could protect you. I thought I could keep you safe from them. But it's too late now. They've already taken me, and they're coming for you next. The mirror wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. You have to finish it. I dropped the letter, my hands shaking, my mind racing. The beginning? What did that mean? I had broken the mirror. I had stopped the thing in the shadows. I had finished it. Hadn't I? A cold realization settled over me like a heavy weight, and I could feel the walls of the house closing in once again. The air was thick, suffocating, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen, growing darker, more solid. I wasn't done. It wasn't over. The whispers had stopped, but something else was coming. Something worse. I backed away from the bed, my heart racing, my mind spinning. What was I supposed to do now? Where could I go? The letter offered no answers, only more questions, and I felt the dread creeping back in, tightening its grip around my chest. And then, from somewhere deep in the house, I heard it. A voice. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Come back. It was Daddy. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The voice was coming from the basement. I had just left there. It wasn't possible. But there it was again, low and insistent. Come back! My heart pounded in my chest as I moved toward the door, my legs feeling like lead. The hallway stretched before me, dark and endless, but the pull of the voice was too strong to resist. I didn't want to go back down there. I didn't want to face whatever was waiting for me, but I had no choice. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended once again into the dark, the familiar smell of damp earth and decay filling the air. I could feel the tension building with every step, the pressure in my chest growing tighter, the weight of the house pressing down on me. When I reached the bottom, the basement was exactly as I had left it. The broken pieces of the mirror still lay scattered across the floor, the air still heavy and cold. But there was something else now. In the center of the room, where the figure had stood before, there was a large, old-fashioned mirror. It wasn't broken like the one I had shattered. This one was whole, its surface smooth and polished, reflecting the faint light that seemed to come from nowhere. I stared at it, my heart hammering in my chest, a sense of dread creeping up my spine. The mirror shouldn't have been there. It couldn't have been there. And then I saw the reflection. Daddy was standing behind me, his face pale, his eyes hollow. You didn't finish it, he whispered. I turned around, but there was no one there, only shadows. I looked back at the mirror, and now there were more reflections. Figures in the dark, shifting and moving, their faces twisted and unrecognizable, their eyes fixed on me. You have to finish it! The voice was everywhere now, echoing in my mind, filling the room with its command. I wanted to run, to escape, but I couldn't move. The pull of the mirror was too strong, its reflection warping, twisting into something grotesque. And then, just as the darkness began to close in, I understood. It wasn't about the mirror. It was never about the mirror. It was about me. I was the one who had to be finished. The moment I realized the truth, everything fell silent. The air in the basement was heavy with an oppressive stillness, the kind that comes just before something terrible happens. I could feel the weight of the mirror pressing down on me, like it was pulling at something deep inside, dragging me toward it, daring me to confront what I had been running from all along. It wasn't about the shadows. It wasn't about Daddy. It had never been about any of those things. It was me. I stumbled back, my legs shaky, as the figures in the mirror shifted and twisted. Their faces were distorted, their features unrecognizable, but they all had the same hollow eyes. Eyes that stared back at me, reflecting something I didn't want to see. Something I had been avoiding since the beginning. And then, from somewhere deep inside, I felt it. The pull. It started as a small, insistent tug, like a thread being pulled loose, unraveling everything I thought I knew. My chest tightened, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I struggled to keep myself grounded, to resist whatever force was trying to draw me in. But the mirror's pull was relentless. I took a step closer, my body moving against my will, my eyes locked on the reflection. The figures in the glass began to blur, their outlines flickering, merging into one another until they became a single, formless mass of darkness. And from that darkness a figure emerged. It was me. But not just me. It was every version of me I had ever feared, every shadow of doubt, every whisper of insecurity. It was the part of me that I had buried, hidden away, afraid to confront. The part that Daddy had tried to keep at bay, the part that had always been there, lurking just beneath the surface. The reflection grinned at me, its eyes gleaming with a cold, predatory hunger. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. It was like staring into a nightmare, a twisted mirror that showed me everything I didn't want to see. "You know what you have to do," the reflection whispered, its voice low and menacing. "You can't run from this anymore." I shook my head, my throat tight. "No, I don't. I can't." But the reflection only grinned wider, its teeth sharp, jagged like shards of broken glass. "You have to finish it." The words echoed in my mind, over and over, until they became a deafening roar, drowning out everything else. The room around me seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, the air growing thicker, heavier, until I could barely breathe. And then the reflection reached out. Its hand stretched through the glass, long fingers curling around my wrist, cold and unyielding. I gasped, trying to pull away, but its grip was too strong. It was pulling me toward the mirror, dragging me into the darkness that waited on the other side. "No!" I screamed, my voice hoarse and desperate. "I won't." But the reflection didn't care. It kept pulling, its hollow eyes boring into mine, its grin widening with every passing second. "You can't escape this," it whispered. "You've always known how it would end." My feet slid across the floor, my body inching closer and closer to the mirror's surface. I could feel the cold glass against my skin, feel the darkness pressing against me, suffocating me. I couldn't fight it. I couldn't stop it. And then, just as I thought I was about to be swallowed whole, I remembered the knife. The long, curved blade Daddy had kept in the duffel bag. The one I had never understood. The one that had seemed out of place, even among the other strange objects he had collected. I twisted, wrenching my arm free from the reflection's grasp, and lunged for the bag. My fingers closed around the hilt of the knife, and I pulled it free, the weight of it grounding me, giving me a moment of clarity amidst the chaos. The reflection's grin faltered, its eyes narrowing as it watched me raise the knife. It knew what I was going to do, and so did I. Without hesitation, I drove the blade into the mirror. The glass shattered with an ear-splitting crack, splinters flying in every direction, the sound reverberating through the basement like a thunderclap. The reflection screamed, a terrible, inhuman sound that rattled my bones, but I didn't stop. I kept driving the knife into the mirror over and over, until there was nothing left but shards of broken glass and darkness. The room trembled, the ground beneath my feet shaking violently, and for a moment, I thought the whole house was going to collapse. But then, as quickly as it had started, it stopped. The air was still, the mirror was gone, and the reflection was silent. I stood there, breathless, the knife still clutched in my hand, staring at the empty space where the mirror had been. The basement was dark, but it was a different kind of darkness now. Quiet, still, almost peaceful. I had done it. I had finished it, or so I thought. For days after, the house was quiet. The shadows were gone. The whispers had stopped. I went through the motions of living, but it was as though I was walking through a dream, disconnected from everything around me. The world outside seemed distant, unreal, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking, just out of sight. I spent most of my time in the house, wandering from room to room, searching for something, anything, that would make sense of what had happened. But there was nothing. The basement was empty, the mirror gone, and Daddy was still missing. And then one night, I heard it again. The voice. It wasn't Daddy this time. It wasn't even the reflection. It was me. A soft, distant whisper, coming from somewhere deep in the house, calling my name. I followed the sound, my heart racing, my mind spinning. It led me back to the bedroom, back to the duffel bag, now sitting neatly on the bed as though it had never left. I opened it, my hands trembling, and there at the bottom of the bag was something I hadn't seen before. Another mirror. Smaller this time, its surface smooth and polished, reflecting my face back at me. And in the reflection, I saw the truth. I hadn't finished it. I never would. The small mirror gleamed in the faint light of the room, its reflection holding my gaze with an almost magnetic force. I felt that familiar pull again, that awful sensation deep in my chest, like something was unspooling inside me, unraveling faster than I could stop it. The cold surface of the mirror reflected nothing but my face, but I knew, deep down, that it wasn't just me staring back. I could feel something else behind the glass, something waiting. I wanted to look away. I wanted to throw the mirror into the corner and smash it like I had done with the first. But my hands wouldn't obey me. They were frozen in place, trembling, the small mirror growing heavier with each passing second. The voice came again, soft at first, like a whisper in the wind. My voice, but distorted, echoing in the back of my mind. "You haven't finished." I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat, the mirror slipping from my fingers and landing with a soft thud on the bed. The reflection rippled for a moment, distorting, before settling back into its smooth, placid surface. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest, a sickening sense of déjà vu washing over me. It was happening again. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave the house, to get as far away from that cursed mirror as I could. But I knew, deep down, that there was no running from this. It wasn't just in the house. It wasn't just in the mirrors. It was in me. The days blurred together. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I couldn't escape the pull of the mirror, the constant reminder that something was unfinished. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. My reflection, staring back at me with that same cold, knowing grin. The whispers were softer now, but they were always there, in the back of my mind, a constant hum that never let me rest. I tried to fight it. I tried to ignore the pull, to stay away from the mirror, but it was useless. The longer I resisted, the stronger it became, until it was all I could think about. The mirror called to me, beckoning me back, whispering promises of answers, of closure. But I knew better. There were no answers. Only more questions. Only more darkness. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. The weight of it all pressed down on me like a suffocating blanket, the walls of the house closing in around me, the air thick and stifling. The mirror was waiting for me, sitting on the bed, its surface smooth and cold, reflecting the dim light of the room. I picked it up, my hands trembling, my heart racing in my chest. The reflection stared back at me, calm and still, but there was something in its eyes now, something I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just watching me, it was hungry. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, and I stumbled back, nearly dropping the mirror. My reflection's eyes followed me, its cold gaze unblinking, its lips curling into that same twisted grin. "You know what you have to do," it whispered, the words wrapping around my mind like a vice. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "No, I can't." But the reflection only smiled wider, its voice growing louder, more insistent. "You have to finish it. It's the only way." My hands trembled as I clutched the mirror, my mind spinning, my thoughts tangled in a web of fear and confusion. The room seemed to tilt, the walls warping, the air growing colder, thicker, as though the house itself was watching, waiting for me to make my move. And then through the haze of panic, I heard something else. Footsteps. They were soft at first, barely audible, but they grew louder, closer, until they were right outside the door. My breath hitched in my throat, and I turned toward the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. The door creaked open, and there, standing in the doorway, was Daddy. But it wasn't him. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, dark circles under them like he hadn't slept in years. His clothes were rumpled, dirty, and his hands hung limply at his sides, his fingers twitching ever so slightly. "Daddy?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't respond. He just stared at me, his empty eyes fixed on the mirror in my hands. His lips parted as though he was trying to speak, but couldn't find the words. I backed away, my heart racing, the mirror growing heavier in my hands. "What's happening? What do you want?" Daddy took a step forward, his movements slow and jerky, like a puppet being dragged by invisible strings. His eyes never left the mirror, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in his gaze. Something dark, something twisted. And then, in a voice that wasn't his own, he spoke. "Finish it." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I stumbled back, nearly dropping the mirror again. I looked down at the glass, at my reflection, and saw that it was smiling. That same cold, knowing grin that I had seen so many times before. The truth slammed into me with a force I hadn't expected. This wasn't about Daddy. This wasn't even about the mirror. This was about me. The mirror wasn't showing me a reflection. It was showing me who I was becoming. I had been fighting it for so long, trying to resist the pull, trying to hold on to what was left of myself. But the more I fought, the stronger it became. The more I resisted, the deeper I sank into the darkness. I had to finish it. I had to let go. The realization settled over me like a heavy weight, and I felt my hands steady, the trembling subsiding. The mirror gleamed in the faint light, its surface smooth and cold, and I knew deep down that there was only one way to end this. I had to give in. I raised the mirror, my breath coming in shallow gasps, and stared into my reflection's eyes. It was smiling at me, that same twisted grin, but now there was something else in its gaze. Understanding. Acceptance. I took a deep breath and nodded. "I'm ready." The reflection's grin widened, and for the first time, the pull I had felt for so long began to subside. The weight lifted from my chest, the whispers quieting to a soft murmur, and the darkness that had surrounded me for so long began to fade. I closed my eyes and pressed the mirror against my chest, feeling the cold glass against my skin. There was a moment of stillness, a moment where everything seemed to hang in the balance. And then, I let go. When I opened my eyes, the mirror was gone. The house was quiet. Still. I stood there, alone in the room, my hands empty, my heart steady. The air was light, the oppressive weight that had hung over me for so long lifted. The shadows were gone. The whispers had stopped. And for the first time, in as long as I could remember, I felt at peace. I had finished it. But as I turned to leave the room, I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye. Another mirror. Small, unassuming. Its surface smooth and polished, and in its reflection, I was smiling. The smile in the mirror lingered as I stared at it, my heart sinking with a cold dread. It was me. There was no denying that. But the expression was wrong. It was too wide, too knowing. And for a moment, I couldn't tell if I was looking at myself or something else. My hands shook as I backed away, my breath shallow. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, pressing in on me from all sides. I had finished it. I had done what the whispers wanted. So why was the mirror still there? Why was I still there, grinning back at myself like I knew a secret I wasn't ready to hear? The whispers began again, faint at first, just a soft murmur at the edges of my thoughts. But they grew louder, sharper, filling my mind with their constant, relentless presence. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it was useless. The voices weren't coming from outside. They were inside me now. I spun around looking for an escape, but the walls seemed to close in, warping and shifting in my vision. The door that led out of the bedroom now seemed impossibly far away, like it was stretching, pulling itself out of my reach. Panic rose in my chest and I stumbled forward, my legs weak, my vision blurring. The house was alive with shadows again. The floorboards creaked under my weight, the walls groaning as though they were straining to hold something back, something that had been waiting for far too long. I could feel it now, a presence pressing in on me from every direction, suffocating me with its weight. I reached the door, my fingers brushing the cold wood, but before I could turn the handle I heard the voice again. louder this time, closer. Finish it. It was my voice. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, the world spinning around me. Slowly, I turned back to face the room, and there, standing in the middle of the floor, was me. Not a reflection, not a shadow. It was me, standing there, watching, waiting. The smile on my face was wrong. It was stretched too wide, too sharp, the eyes gleaming with an emotion I couldn't understand. Fear? Hunger? I didn't know. All I knew was that it wasn't me. It couldn't be. But it was. I took a step back, my heart pounding, my mouth dry. The whispers were louder now, echoing in my mind, overlapping, filling my head with their demands. Finish it. Finish it. Finish it. I don't know what you want, I screamed, my voice breaking, tears burning in my eyes. I did what you asked. I broke the mirror. I finished it. The other me, the thing, tilted its head, its smile never faltering. It took a step closer, the movement slow, deliberate, its eyes locked on mine. You haven't finished anything, it said, its voice low, almost mocking. You can't finish what you don't understand. I can't. I stumbled over my words, my mind racing. None of this made sense. The mirror was gone. The shadows were gone. But this thing was still here. I was still here. It took another step toward me, its grin widening. You can't escape this. You never could. I backed up against the door, my hands shaking, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it would burst out of my chest. The air around me was thick with tension, the shadows swirling, growing deeper, darker. What do you want from me? I whispered, my voice barely audible. The thing didn't answer. It just watched me, its grin widening, its eyes gleaming with that same cold, cruel hunger. And then, slowly, it raised its hand. In its palm was another mirror. Smaller this time, just like the one I had held in my hands before, but its surface was cracked, splintered, reflecting a distorted version of the room. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat as the cracks seemed to shift and twist, forming strange shapes, symbols that I couldn't understand. The thing stepped closer, holding the mirror out toward me. This is yours, it said, its voice a twisted echo of my own. I shook my head, my body trembling. No, I don't want it. I don't want any of this. But the thing just smiled, its eyes narrowing. You don't have a choice. I reached out, almost against my will, my fingers brushing the cold, jagged surface of the mirror. The moment I touched it, a shock ran through me, like ice water flooding my veins. The whispers surged, louder now, filling my mind with their demands, their endless, relentless cries. And then I saw it. In the broken reflection of the mirror, I saw the truth. I hadn't finished anything. I hadn't stopped the shadows. I hadn't saved myself from whatever was lurking in the darkness. I was the darkness. It had been inside me all along, waiting for the moment when I would break, when I would let it in. I had been running from it, fighting it, but there was no escape. No way to win. I was the mirror. The reflection grinned back at me, its face twisted and wrong, and I felt the last thread of control slip from my grasp. The thing's voice was in my head now, soft and insistent. Finish it. I stared at the mirror in my hands, the cracks forming a spiderweb of broken glass, and I knew what I had to do. I raised it high, the jagged edges glinting in the dim light, and brought it down with all the force I could muster. The mirror shattered, the sound deafening, like the crack of thunder splitting the sky. Shards of glass flew in every direction, cutting into my skin, my face, my hands. But I didn't care. I kept smashing again and again until there was nothing left but dust and broken pieces scattered around me. The thing was gone. The room was silent. And then, slowly, I looked down at my hands. They were covered in blood. My blood. And in the jagged pieces of the shattered mirror, I saw my reflection. Smiling. The blood dripped from my hands, staining the shattered glass at my feet. My reflection stared back at me from a dozen jagged pieces, each one distorted, twisted, but all of them smiling. The grin was too wide, too knowing, like it understood something I hadn't quite grasped yet. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My body felt heavy, weighed down by something I couldn't name, and the room around me seemed to blur, the edges softening as though reality itself was fraying. The whispers were back, faint but persistent, curling around my thoughts like vines. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew what they were saying. They didn't need to speak anymore. I had already heard everything I needed to. I had finished it. I had broken the mirror, shattered the reflection. But the truth was something I couldn't escape, something that had been waiting for me all along. I was the mirror. The thing in the reflection. The thing I had been running from had always been me. And now, it was too late. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the broken pieces on the floor, the blood pooling around my feet. Time didn't seem to exist in the house anymore. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down on me like the weight of 100 eyes watching from the shadows. The house itself felt alive, pulsing with an energy I could barely comprehend. I had finished it. I kept telling myself that over and over again, trying to believe it. But the more I repeated it, the more hollow the words felt, like they were a lie I had been telling myself all along. The house was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that comes before something terrible happens. The kind of stillness that makes your skin crawl, that makes you feel like you're being watched even when you're alone. I wasn't alone. Slowly, I turned to look at the door, the one I had closed behind me when I first came into the room. It was still shut, but something was different now. The air felt colder, sharper, and the shadows around the edges of the door seemed to move, flickering in and out of sight. I took a step forward, my legs weak, my hands trembling. My breath came in shallow gasps, each one a struggle against the weight pressing down on my chest. The door felt impossibly far away, like it was receding into the distance even as I moved closer. And then, from the other side of the door, I heard it. A knock. Software almost polite. But it wasn't the sound that terrified me. It was what came after. The voice. "I know you're in there." My heart stopped. The voice was mine. Low, calm, with a quiet edge of something I couldn't name. "You can't hide," it said, a little louder now. "You know that, don't you?" The door creaked, the wood groaning under some invisible pressure, and I took another step back, my heart pounding in my chest. "Let me in." I shook my head, my hands shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. No, you're not real." But the voice only laughed, a low guttural sound that sent a chill down my spine. "I'm as real as you are." I backed away, my body trembling, my legs barely able to hold me up. The door creaked again, and I could see the handle turning slowly, as though someone on the other side was testing it, waiting for the right moment to push it open. The whispers surged in my mind, louder now, overlapping, echoing, filling every corner of my thoughts. "Finish it. Finish it. Finish it." I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The whispers were inside me now, twisting and curling around every thought, every breath. I couldn't escape them. I couldn't escape myself. The door cracked open. I screamed, stumbling back, my foot catching on a piece of broken glass, and I fell hard onto the floor. My hands hit the shards, the sharp edges slicing into my skin, but I barely felt it. All I could see was the door, inching open, the darkness beyond it shifting, moving, alive. The thing stepped into the room. It was me. But it wasn't just a reflection this time. It was real, solid, standing there in the doorway, smiling that same twisted smile, its eyes gleaming with a hunger that made my blood run cold. "You can't run," it said, stepping closer. "You never could." I scrambled back, my hands slipping on the blood and glass, my breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. The thing crouched down in front of me, its face inches from mine, its breath cold against my skin. Its smile never wavered, its eyes locking onto mine with a cruel, mocking glint. "You didn't finish it," it whispered. "Not yet." Tears blurred my vision, and I shook my head, my voice barely a whisper. "What do you want?" The thing's smile widened. "I want you." And then, before I could react, it lunged. I woke up in the dark, gasping for air, my heart racing. My hands flew to my face, my body trembling, but there was nothing there. No blood, no glass. The room was empty, silent, the air still and heavy. I looked around, my breath coming in shallow gasps, but the thing was gone. The door was closed, the room as it had always been. But something was different now. I could feel it deep inside me, something shifting, something changing. I stood up, my legs weak, my body trembling, and moved toward the mirror. It was whole again, its surface smooth, unbroken, reflecting my face back at me. I stared into the glass, my heart pounding, and waited. For a moment nothing happened, and then I smiled. The smile spread across my reflection's face, slow and deliberate, as though it had been waiting for this moment all along. My heart pounded in my chest, a strange, eerie calm settling over me as I stared into the mirror, into myself. The whispers were quiet now, just a faint hum at the edges of my thoughts, but I knew they weren't gone. They were waiting, watching, just like they always had been. Because I had finished it. I raised my hand, watching as the reflection did the same, our movements perfectly synchronized. There was no distortion, no flicker of something wrong. It was just me. Or maybe it had always been just me. The smile on my face didn't falter. It felt natural now, like it belonged there, like it had always belonged there. I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had melted away, replaced by something else, something darker, deeper. I was the mirror. I had always been the mirror, and now I was whole.